Brother got my college fund because he was the smart one. Now he's unemployed and I'm a millionaire tech CEO. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I was always the second choice in my family. My brother was 3 years older, and from the moment I could walk, it was clear who the golden child was. He got straight A's without trying, won every academic competition our small town had to offer, and our parents never missed an opportunity to remind me that I should be more like him. I wasn't a bad student, but I wasn't exceptional either. I pulled B's and C's, spent most of my time doodling in notebooks, and had this weird fascination with taking apart old electronics just to see how they worked. My parents saw this as a waste of time. They'd find me in the garage with screwdrivers and broken radios, and my mom would sigh and say I was just making messes while my brother was upstairs studying for his AP exams. The college fund situation started when I was about 14. My parents had been saving money for both of us since we were born, but it became clear they thought investing more in my brother's education would yield better returns. They never explicitly said they were taking my money, but suddenly there were conversations about how my brother needed to go to an expensive private university to reach his full potential, while I could probably do just fine at the local community college. I remember the exact moment it all came crashing down. I was 17, sitting at our kitchen table with acceptance letters from 3 different state schools. I wasn't valedictorian material, but I'd worked hard my senior year and managed to get accepted to some decent programs. I was actually excited about studying computer science, even though my parents thought it was just an extension of my electronics hobby. My dad walked into the kitchen that morning with this serious expression and sat down across from me. He explained that they'd made a difficult decision about the college money. My brother had been accepted to an elite private university with a prestigious engineering program, and the tuition was astronomical. They decided to use both college funds to pay for his education because he had the better chance of success. The way he said it was so matter-of-fact, like he was explaining why we needed to buy generic cereal instead of name brand. He told me I was smart in my own way, but my brother was exceptional, and exceptional people deserved exceptional opportunities. I could take out student loans, work part-time, maybe start a community college and transfer later. It would build character. I just sat there staring at the acceptance letters, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. All those years of being told I wasn't quite good enough, and now here was the proof. My own parents didn't believe in me enough to invest in my future. They were betting everything on my brother because he was the safe choice, the sure thing. That night I lay in bed planning my escape. I couldn't rely on my parents for anything, so I'd have to figure it out myself. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took on extra shifts at my part-time job at the local electronics store, and started selling refurbished computers I'd built from spare parts. The owner of the electronics store, this older guy who'd been watching me tinker with broken devices for months, started giving me more complex repair jobs and paying me under the table. I ended up at a state school 3 hours away, living in the cheapest dorm available and eating ramen for dinner most nights. My parents came to move me in, and I could see the guilt in my mom's eyes when she saw how sparse my room was compared to my brother's setup at his fancy private school. But they didn't offer to help beyond buying me a small refrigerator and some basic supplies. My brother thrived in his first year, or at least that's what we heard during our weekly family phone calls. He was making connections, joining prestigious clubs, and talking about internships at major corporations. Meanwhile, I was struggling to balance work and classes, staying up until 3 in the morning coding assignments while my roommate partied. But something weird started happening during my sophomore year. The computer science program at my school was actually really good, and I discovered I had a natural talent for understanding complex systems. The same brain that could figure out why a radio wasn't working could also debug intricate software problems and design elegant solutions to programming challenges. I started taking on freelance projects, building websites and small applications for local businesses. Word spread, and soon I was making more money from my side projects than from my campus job. My grades improved because I was actually excited about what I was learning, and professors started noticing my work. The real turning point came during my junior year when I developed a simple app that helped students find study groups and share notes. I built it mostly to solve my own problems, but when I showed it to friends, they went crazy for it. Within a month, half the campus was using it, and students from other schools started asking if they could get access too. I spent that entire summer living in my tiny apartment, surviving on pizza and energy drinks, scaling the app to handle thousands of users. I taught myself server management, database optimization, and user interface design through pure necessity. My parents called occasionally, usually to tell me about my brother's latest achievements or to ask if I was still planning to graduate on time. By senior year, my app had spread to over 50 colleges across the state. I was making enough money to pay for school without loans and had started getting inquiries from investors who'd heard about this college student building something that was growing like wildfire. I was exhausted but exhilarated, working 18-hour days between classes and managing what had become a real business. Meanwhile, my brother was struggling more than anyone in our family wanted to admit. The coursework at his prestigious school was brutal and he'd never learned how to handle failure or setbacks. He'd coasted through high school on natural intelligence, but college required discipline and resilience he'd never developed. His grades started slipping and he began calling home more frequently, sounding stressed and overwhelmed. I graduated with a job offer from a major tech company and a growing business that was generating 6 figures in revenue. My parents came to the ceremony and I could see the surprise in their faces when they realized I wasn't the struggling student they'd imagined. I'd kept most of my success quiet, partly because I was focused on the work and partly because I wasn't sure how to explain that their throwaway child had actually figured things out. The job offer was tempting, but I decided to take a gap year and focus on growing my business. I moved to a bigger city, hired my first employees, and started developing new features that would expand beyond just college students. The app evolved into a comprehensive platform for academic collaboration, and we started getting interest from high schools and even some corporations. My brother graduated a year later, but barely. His final GPA was mediocre, and despite the prestigious degree, he struggled to find work in his field. The job market was competitive, and employers weren't impressed by his transcript or his inability to demonstrate practical skills. He moved back home and spent months sending out applications and getting rejection letters. I was too busy to pay much attention to family drama at that point. My company had grown to 15 employees, we'd secured significant funding from investors, and I was working on partnerships with major educational institutions. The platform was being used by over 1 million students, and we were expanding internationally. Update 1. The first family explosion happened during Christmas of my second year out of college. I'd driven home for the holidays, and the contrast between my brother and me was impossible to ignore. He'd been unemployed for 8 months, was still living in his childhood bedroom, and seemed to have lost the confidence that had defined him growing up. My parents kept trying to maintain the fiction that he was just taking his time finding the right opportunity, but I could see the strain. They'd spent nearly $200,000 on his education, and he was working part-time at a local coffee shop while sending out resumes that went nowhere. Meanwhile, I was driving a Tesla, wearing clothes that actually fit properly, and trying to figure out how to tell them I'd just signed a deal that would make me legitimately wealthy. The company had been acquired by a major tech corporation for an amount that made my head spin, but I was staying on as CEO of our division and maintaining significant equity. The conversation happened on Christmas Eve. We were sitting in the living room, and my mom was doing that thing where she tried to boost my brother's confidence by talking about how smart he was and how any company would be lucky to have him. I was only half listening, responding to emails on my phone about the acquisition details. My dad made some comment about how I seemed to be doing okay for myself, and before I could stop myself, I told them about the acquisition. Not the full amount, but enough to make it clear that I wasn't just getting by anymore. The room went completely silent. My brother's face went through about 5 different emotions in 10 seconds. My parents looked confused, like they couldn't process what I just said. My mom asked if I was sure the numbers were right, and when I confirmed them, she started crying. But they weren't happy tears. She was crying because she realized what they'd done. They'd invested everything in the child they thought was guaranteed to succeed, and in doing so, they'd essentially told their other child she wasn't worth betting on. Now the results were in, and their certainty had been completely wrong. My brother left the room without saying anything. I found him later sitting in the garage, staring at the workbench where I used to take apart electronics. He looked smaller somehow, like the confidence that had carried him through life had just evaporated. He told me he'd always known he was the favorite, but he'd never really thought about what that meant for me. He'd assumed I was okay with it because I never complained much, and he'd been so focused on living up to everyone's expectations that he hadn't considered the pressure that created for both of us. The worst part was that he'd started to believe his own hype. He'd gotten so used to being told he was exceptional that he'd never developed the skills to handle being ordinary. When college got difficult, he didn't know how to push through because he'd never had to work for success before. When the job market rejected him, he didn't know how to adapt because he'd always been told his intelligence would be enough. I felt terrible for him, but I was also angry. I'd spent years believing I wasn't good enough, working twice as hard as everyone else because I thought that was what it took to prove my worth. I'd built something amazing partly because I'd had to, because no one else was going to do it for me. The rest of the holiday was awkward. My parents kept trying to celebrate my success, but it felt forced and strange. They'd missed the entire journey, all the late nights and small victories and moments of doubt. Now they wanted to be proud of me, but it felt like they were proud of the outcome, not the person who'd created it. I went back to the city feeling emotionally drained. The acquisition went through, and suddenly I was dealing with integration meetings and strategy sessions and all the complexities of being part of a larger organization. It was exciting but overwhelming, and I didn't have anyone to share it with who really understood what it meant. Update 2. 6 months later, everything changed again in a way I never could have predicted. My brother called me on a Tuesday morning, and I could hear something different in his voice. He'd been thinking about our Christmas conversation, he said, and he wanted to do something that might sound crazy. He'd been researching my company obsessively, trying to understand how I built it and why it had been successful. He'd realized that all those years of academic achievement hadn't taught him how to create something from nothing, how to solve real problems for real people. He wanted to learn. But here's the twist that knocked me over. He didn't want a job or a handout. He wanted to start his own company, and he wanted me to be his first investor. He'd identified a problem in the education space that my platform hadn't addressed, and he'd spent months developing a business plan and building a prototype. I was skeptical at first. This was the same person who'd been struggling to find any job 6 months earlier, and now he wanted to be an entrepreneur? But when he showed me what he'd been working on, I was genuinely surprised by the quality of his thinking. He created a system for helping students with learning disabilities navigate college coursework, something that combined his academic background with real market research and user interviews. He'd spent weeks talking to students, parents, and educators, identifying gaps in existing solutions and testing his ideas with potential users. The humbling part was that his approach was methodical and thorough in ways mine had never been. I'd built my company through intuition and rapid iteration, but he'd approached the problem like a researcher, gathering data and testing hypotheses before building anything. I agreed to meet him in person to see a full presentation. He drove to the city, and I took him to the same coffee shop where I'd had my first investor meeting 3 years earlier. He was nervous but prepared, and his presentation was honestly impressive. He'd learned from my experience but wasn't trying to copy it, instead focusing on a completely different problem with a different solution. The really unexpected part was how much he'd changed. The arrogance and assumption of success were gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and willingness to work. He'd spent the previous months learning to code, talking to potential customers, and developing business skills he'd never needed before. He was asking good questions and showing real respect for how difficult building a company actually was. I decided to invest, but not just because he was my brother. His idea was solid, his execution plan was thoughtful, and frankly, he was attacking a problem I cared about. I'd struggled with traditional learning approaches throughout school, and I knew there were thousands of students who needed better support systems. The investment conversation with my parents was surreal. They were proud that he was starting a business, but they were also confused about why he needed my money instead of theirs. I had to explain that successful businesses need investors who understand the market and can provide strategic guidance, not just emotional support and financial backup. My brother's company launched 8 months later, and it was immediately clear he'd found something real. The product was well-designed, the marketing was smart, and the customer response was enthusiastic. He'd built a team of people who complemented his skills, and he was learning to be a leader in a way that felt authentic rather than entitled. But the real plot twist came when his company started growing faster than mine had. Within 18 months, he'd attracted major investors, formed partnerships with universities across the country, and was being featured in business magazines as an example of innovative thinking in education technology. Suddenly, I was the older entrepreneur watching my younger brother's meteoric rise. It was a complete reversal of our childhood dynamic, but it felt different this time. Instead of competing for our parents' approval, we were both building things we believed in and supporting each other's success. The strangest part was how our parents reacted. They'd gone from seeing him as the sure bet to watching him struggle to seeing him succeed again, but this time they understood the journey was complicated. They'd also gone from seeing me as the backup plan to watching me succeed to realizing they'd completely misjudged both of their children. My mom told me later that the whole experience had taught her how dangerous it was to put children in boxes. She'd been so focused on academic achievement as a predictor of success that she'd missed other forms of intelligence and potential. She'd also realized that struggle and failure were often necessary parts of developing resilience and creativity. My brother and I started having regular conversations about business strategy, market challenges, and the weird experience of being young entrepreneurs in a rapidly changing industry. We were finally relating to each other as equals, both dealing with similar pressures and opportunities. His company ended up being acquired 2 years after launch for an amount that made my early success look modest. The buyer was specifically interested in his systematic approach to product development and his deep understanding of the education market. He'd built something that solved real problems for underserved students, and the impact was measurable and significant. Final update. 5 years after that first Christmas confrontation, our family dynamic has completely transformed. Both my brother and I are running successful companies, but we're also collaborating on projects that combine our different approaches and expertise. We've started a foundation that provides technology resources to students from low-income families, and we're working on initiatives that address systemic barriers in education. The money stuff resolved itself in the most unexpected way. My parents tried to offer to pay back my college fund with interest, but I didn't want it. Instead, we used that money as seed funding for our foundation, turning what had been a source of pain into something positive. My brother and I have talked extensively about how our different paths shaped us. He acknowledges that early success made him complacent and that struggling was ultimately necessary for his growth. I've realized that being overlooked gave me hunger and resilience that served me well as an entrepreneur. We've also talked about how our parents' favoritism affected both of us negatively. He felt enormous pressure to live up to impossible expectations while I felt like I had to prove my worth constantly. Neither of those dynamics was healthy, but we both learned to channel those experiences into motivation for building something meaningful. The relationship with my parents has healed, but it's different now. They've had to confront their own assumptions about success and intelligence, and they've become more thoughtful about how they relate to both of us. They're proud of what we've built, but they're also proud of who we've become as people. My brother is married now, and he and his wife just had their first child. I'm still single, focused on growing my company and exploring new opportunities in the tech industry. We're both happy with our choices, and we support each other's decisions without judgment. The lesson that emerges from all of this isn't really about money or business success. It's about how families can create limiting beliefs and self-fulfilling prophecies without realizing it. When parents pick favorites or make assumptions about their children's potential, they're not just affecting opportunities, they're shaping how those children see themselves and their possibilities. I'm grateful for the struggle now, even though it was painful at the time. Having to prove myself forced me to develop skills and resilience that I might not have needed otherwise. It also gave me empathy for other people who've been underestimated or overlooked. My brother is grateful for his struggle too, though it took him longer to get there. He says that failing at his first career attempt taught him humility and showed him the difference between intelligence and wisdom. He's a better leader now because he understands what it feels like to be uncertain and to have to work for success. We both wish our parents had handled things differently, but we've forgiven them and learned from their mistakes. They were doing what they thought was best with the information they had, and they've grown and changed as people throughout this process. The companies we've built are successful, but the real victory is that we've broken the cycle of competition and comparison that defined our childhood. We've learned to celebrate each other's successes and support each other through challenges. We've become the family we always had the potential to be, but it took some major disruption to get there. Looking back, I can see that the college fund situation was a catalyst for both of us becoming who we were meant to be. It forced us to confront our assumptions about ourselves and each other, and it pushed us to develop capabilities we might not have discovered otherwise. The tech industry is unpredictable and success can be fleeting, but the relationships we've built and the lessons we've learned will last regardless of what happens to our companies. We've turned a painful family dynamic into a source of strength and mutual support. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being forced to prove everyone wrong, including yourself. It's not fun in the moment, but it can lead to discovering potential you never knew you had. Both my brother and I are living proof that initial assumptions about success and failure can be completely wrong, and that struggle often leads to the most meaningful achievements. The story isn't really over because we're both still building and growing, but the main chapter about family dysfunction and sibling rivalry has been resolved. We've learned that intelligence comes in many forms, that success is complicated and unpredictable, and that the most important thing is supporting the people you care about in becoming their best selves. Now when people ask me about my success, I tell them it started with being told I wasn't good enough. That rejection became fuel for proving I could create something valuable, and that motivation led to opportunities one never could have imagined. Sometimes the best gift your family can give you is the gift of having to figure things out for yourself.